How are you doing? Today, I want to talk about the Japanese judicial system that easily brings about false charges in a court. So normally in Japan, capital punishment is carried out by the execution order by the Minister of Justice of Japan. So the number of prisoners under the sentence of death in detention centers in Japan at this point in time is said to be 107. And the oldest prisoners that under the sentence of death has been in jail for about 50 years without having been executed. So nevertheless, the successive ministers of justice of Japan has hesitated to approve the execution order one after another, but they actually made a decision carefully to approve it. So do you know why? So because they question the possibility of false charges by prosecutors, judging from the Japanese judicial system, even though they are the head of justice of Japan. So even the Minister of Justice of Japan distrusts Japanese judicial system. So the fact that Japanese judicial system is as terrible as that in Middle Ages is too obvious to be criticized by other countries. So there are actually two reasons that provoke false charges in justice of Japan. So the first one is too long detention periods. Detention period for suspects is 20 days and 72 hours. So the reason why mandatory bail is not accepted is that court judges there is a risk of evidence of destruction and escape. So the Japanese police officers firstly need to send the suspects to a prosecutor's office within 48 hours. So prior to sending suspects to a prosecutor's office, police officers will have to decide if they send suspects to a prosecutor's office or not in 24 hours. So, and prosecutors applies for detention warrant to a court. And if it is approved, suspects will be detained for 10 days. And this first detention period can be extended by 10 days. So the total detention period is 23 days, whose breakdown is 20 days detention by prosecution and 48 hours detention by police. And the very first 24 hours detention by police to decide if they send a suspect to prosecutor's office or not. So comparing this much detention period in Japan to that in other countries, this detention period is extraordinarily long. So moreover, suspects undergoes interrogation for all this detention period. So if a suspect make a confession during the interrogation, suspect's confession is admitted as valid evidence in a court in Japan. In contrast, for example, in the United States, even if prosecutors detain a suspect for 10 days and induce a suspect to make a confession, prosecutors are seen as they drive suspects into nervous breakdown and force a confession from a suspect. Because no voluntariness can be found in this interrogation, suspect's confession can't be admitted as valid evidence in a court in the United States. So no detention warrant is issued to a suspect by a court in the United States in this case. So in Japan, it is said that the best timing to get a confession from a suspect is right before extension of detention. So a suspect has the feeling like, if I miss the chance to confess my crimes that I even have never done, I will lose the chance to relieve from detention forever. So a suspect can't put up with a situation that he finally admit the guilty that he never knows. So the second reason is Japan's high conviction rate. So Japan's conviction rate in 2018 was 99.96%. So it is almost 100%. If you are charged by a prosecutor in Japan, you are almost found guilty in a court in Japan. So some people say prosecutors are excellent. So if they charge a suspect will be found guilty inevitably. So in other words, if prosecutors charge a suspects, they grow sense of mission that drives them to lead judgment of the case to a conviction absolutely. So this situation easily brings about false charges and a fabrication through false confession from a suspect. So in Japan, a suspect is treated as a criminal in public. And there's some people saying if a suspect get arrested, he is almost found guilty. So he is criminal. But this is a very big mistake. This is a very big mistake. So the conviction rate is a probability a person who faces persecution is found guilty. So suspect's conviction is not decisive at the stage of arrest with higher probability. So actually persecution rate is averagely 40% against the entire arrest in Japan. So the possibility that suspects may not face persecution is way bigger in Japan. So even except for the case of traffic violation, the ratio that suspects get arrested and persecuted is 50% at the most. So persecutors persecute only 30% of entire criminal law offenders. Then people who face persecution is found guilty almost 100%. So which means the first hearing is decisive to guilty at the time the suspects are persecuted by persecutors. So in other words, persecution effectively takes a role as a court. It is totally away from a separation of three powers in Japan, because it is like the sentence is pronounced to suspects at the time suspects is persecuted by persecutors. This is the problem of the Japanese judicial system that is criticized as a judicial system in the Middle Ages from other countries. So unless persecutors feel sure that they can lead judgment of the case to conviction 100%, they won't persecute anyone. Which means they will avoid charging a case doubtful whether it is sentenced as a guilty with confidence. So, in my sense, things with uncertainty was never guaranteed 100% should rather be revealed in a court.